At my dad's birthday dinner, my siblings mocked me for being broke. One even joked he'd pay for my meal until the maitre d' called me Madam CEO, and the chef came out to greet me personally. Turns out, I'd been hiding an $80 million secret from them for years. What happened next exposed everything's status, resentment, and the truth about love in our family. You won't believe how this night changed us forever. I'm Senna Win, and I recently celebrated my 32nd birthday. I couldn't wait to celebrate my dad's 65th birthday at the city's most upscale restaurant, LL. Success and status have always been my siblings' obsessions. They had no idea that I had been keeping my actual career a secret from them for years, even though I had chosen a different route. The most unexpected collision between their fancy clothing and my modest jewelry and basic top was about to occur. Take a moment, though, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments section before I get into what happened that night. For more real-life situations that can motivate you, click the like button and subscribe if you like stories about defending yourself. I was raised in a family that could be described as upper middle class, but as the years passed, appearances and social status became more and more important. Graham Wynne, my father, was the epitome of the self-made guy. He began with nothing and, with unwavering perseverance and innumerable 16-hour days, developed a prosperous construction company. He is the son of a factory worker and a waitress. Despite the way she handled herself, you would never realize my mother, Celeste Wynne, had a similar upbringing. She rebranded herself as a social climber extraordinaire once my father's business took off, assiduously fostering relationships with the right people and becoming fixated on our family's reputation in the neighborhood. They were my siblings after that. Sloane Wynne, my older sister, was a star child from the beginning. After earning honors from Harvard Legal, she immediately found work at one of the nation's most prominent legal firms, Peterson, Matthews, and King. Sloane never allowed people to forget her achievements, displaying her luxury attire as if it were part of her work description and bringing up her alma mater in inappropriate conversations. Beckett Wynne, my brother, took a similar route. He became a plastic surgeon, treating celebrities and affluent patients. Beckett, who was always flaunting his newest fancy automobile or holiday pictures from far-flung places, was possibly even more conceited than Sloane. His entire sense of value was based on his material belongings and the jealousy they evoked in others. Then there was me. I was never like the other members of my family. I was introverted and values-driven, whereas they were outgoing and status-conscious. I like reading, making things, and wondering why things happened the way they did. Tension was built from a young age by such discrepancy. "Why aren't you more like your sister, Senna?" became my mother's catchphrase when I was a child. Take a look at Sloane's flawless grades. Take a look at the influential people she is connecting with. At first, I made an effort to obey my parents' instructions despite my inclinations. To their first dismay, I duly obtained a business degree from a respectable university, but not an Ivy League one. I obtained a position at a big company after graduation and started down the path my family had anticipated. But I was miserable after 2 years. The task seemed pointless. I couldn't imagine myself working in corporate politics for the next 40 years because it was heartbreaking. So I gave up. My family started to view me as the failure because of that choice. When I informed them, my mother bemoaned, "You had such a promising future. What are we going to tell our pals now?" My dad, who used to be my biggest fan when I was a kid, simply had a disappointed expression. Although he didn't say much, his silence was quite telling. What I did next was something I purposefully kept hidden from my family. They believed that I had accepted a job as an assistant manager at a neighborhood bookshop, which they found appropriately embarrassing, but in reality, I was investing all of my money and time into starting Learning Bridge, an educational technology firm. The business created cutting-edge, easily accessible software for underprivileged schools and students who are frequently left behind in the digital gap. The final significant family get-together before to my father's birthday meal is still fresh in my memory. It was Christmas. We were all opening presents at my parents' house. As my mother unwrapped the cashmere scarf I had given her, she smiled tightly and said, "This is lovely, Senna. Very considerate. Given your circumstances, I'm sure it must have cost you a lot." Sloane grinned. "Steph, the bookstore must have paid you a complete month's pay." I tried to sound even as I answered, "Some people find fulfillment in helping others rather than just making money." Beckett laughed. "People say it when they are unable to generate income. Rationalization is a term for it." My father, who seemed to have more important things to do, simply watched the conversation in silence, periodically checking his watch. None of them were aware that my business had recently finished a significant funding round, which valued Learning Bridge at more than $80 million. This small bookshop employment was really a front. It allowed me to manage my business behind the scenes while maintaining a connection to the books I loved. I kept up a lifestyle that showed no signs of my true success, drove a dependable but unimpressive automobile, and lived in a modest but comfortable apartment. Why did I not tell my family about my accomplishments? It was a test in part. Instead than focusing on my accomplishments or possessions, I wanted to know if they could love and respect me for who I was. I desired relationships that were genuine and based on more than just status. However, self-defense was an additional component. I had witnessed the transformation of my parents and siblings through wealth and achievement. That was not what I wanted for myself. My father and I had an especially tangled connection. We had become close when I was little. On Saturday mornings, my father would take me fishing alone while sharing anecdotes about his early years and the lessons he had learned the hard way. However, Dad grew more aloof, more preoccupied with connections and appearances as his business and our family's social goals developed. The father who used to tell me that morality is more important than money suddenly appeared to evaluate everyone, including his kids, mostly on the basis of their social standing and financial achievement. My father suffered a mild heart attack 3 months before his birthday. It shocked me, but he bounced back immediately. I liked him very much and wasn't prepared to lose him, even if our relationship was tense. I made the decision to make an effort to get back in touch, beginning with his next birthday party. I had no idea how that night would turn out. With a mixture of excitement and fear, dinner arrived on the morning of my father's birthday. I pondered my options carefully as I stood in front of my closet. By wearing the part, showing up in the kind of designer attire that my siblings would instantly recognize as pricey, I could finally tell the truth about my achievement. I'll admit that I was tempted. However, that would negate the reason I had spent so many years keeping my accomplishment a secret. I went for a basic black dress instead. For my family's status-conscious eye, it was stylish and well-made without being overtly costly. I accessorized it with a beautiful silver bracelet and tiny pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandma. I looked tidy and fit for a fine dining establishment when I looked in the mirror. However, there was nothing about my look that said "successful CEO." I was putting on a little lipstick when my phone rang. One of the few individuals who was aware of the reality of my business and family circumstances was Juno, who had been my best friend since college. "Are you prepared for the show tonight?" After I picked up, she inquired. I sighed, as ready as I'll ever be. A part of me questions if I should tell them everything. Put an end to this charade. "You understand what I'm thinking," Juno answered. "Although I find it strange that you have kept this a secret for so long, I can also see why. Just keep in mind that you have nothing to prove to them tonight, no matter what. You've created something truly remarkable. Not only is it profitable, but it is also positively impacting the lives of children." I grinned, appreciating her help. On his birthday last year, Sloan interrupted Beckett to discuss her promotion after he had spent 20 minutes telling everyone about the celebrity nose operation he had done. Neither of them inquired about my life at all. Juno remarked, "Well, maybe this year will be different," but it sounded like she had as much uncertainty about it as I did. I wrapped my father's gift, a first edition of his favorite Ernest Hemingway book that I had spent months finding, after we hung up. In contrast to the lavish presents my siblings would bring, I knew my family would view the book as proof of my limited means, even though it had cost more than most people would spend on a gift. Located in the center of downtown, Lucille took up the full top floor of one of the most recognizable skyscrapers in the city. I had visited there numerous times, generally to host prospective customers or business partners. The restaurant had been picked for my father's birthday because of its amazing views, flawless service, and famous chef, all of which made it the ideal place to wow folks. My family was unaware that I was well known among the employees. I had become friendly with Emmanuel, the owner, and most of his employees because Learning Bridge had held multiple charity galas at Lucille. I wanted some time to gather myself before I faced my family, so I arrived about 15 minutes early. Arden, the head hostess, welcomed me as soon as I exited the elevator and entered the restaurant's sophisticated lobby. "It's good to see you again, Miss Wilson," she remarked kindly. "Tonight, I'm here for my father's birthday supper. Wilson should be in charge of the reservation. Obviously, the private dining area has been set up as requested, and I can see it here." She paused, appearing a little perplexed. "I was unaware that this was a family gathering. Emmanuel will be curious about your presence." I whispered, actually, Arden, I would appreciate it if you and the staff could keep your knowledge of me private. My relatives aren't. They are unaware of my business or my achievements, though. The story is lengthy. Arden nodded despite raising an eyebrow. Naturally, Miss Wilson. We'll keep our distance. I ordered a sparkling water and sat down in the bar area to wait. I could see the city below through the floor-to-ceiling windows, with the sun setting and the lights starting to twinkle. I was always soothed by the vista, which served as a reminder that there was more to the world than my family relationships. I saw my family coming 20 minutes later. My parents arrived first, my father in a fitted suit, looking dapper but exhausted, and my mother in an obviously expensive gown, dripping with jewels. Sloane and her husband Richard, who appeared to have stepped out of a luxury magazine, followed them. Beckett was the last to arrive, making a show of giving the valet his keys so that everyone could see his newest sports vehicle. I inhaled deeply before going up to them with my present. I hugged Dad and gave him the wrapped book, saying, "Happy birthday, Dad." He gave a slightly stiff hug in reply. "Thank you for coming, Senna." His gaze was already straying to a group of recently arrived business associates who had also been invited to the party. With a critical gaze, my mother examined every inch of me. "For your father's special day, couldn't you have put in more effort?" she muttered. "That dress appears to have been purchased on clearance." With a light-hearted tone, I answered, "It's good to see you too, Mom." "God, Steph, even the hostesses here are dressed better than you," Sloane muttered after giving me an air kiss on the cheek. "Please try not to make us look foolish in front of Dad's friends." With a forced joviality he saved for those he deemed beneath him, Beckett came last and gave me a shoulder clap. "Sister baby, I see you're still looking great on a budget. Your elder brother is a great resource if you ever need help investing the little money you earn so you can buy some nice clothes." I faked a grin, already experiencing the same mixture of rage and hurt that family get-togethers usually provoked. Almost ignoring me, my father was now absorbed in welcoming his business acquaintances. Feeling like an outsider, as I had so many times before, I stood to the side and watched as my family enchanted and astonished the expanding crowd. The maitre d' approached my father after we had been chatting in the reception area for around 20 minutes. "Mister, your private dining room is now prepared, Wilson. Follow me, please." The group of about a dozen business associates and my family started to make their way toward the rear of the restaurant. I slipped behind them, gripping my tiny handbag, immediately experiencing the well-known feeling of being the last thing on their mind. The family member was included out of duty rather than choice. Sloane turned abruptly as we got closer to the private dining room and drew me away. Her well-groomed fingers squeezed my arm a bit too firmly. "Don't you think you're a bit underdressed for this occasion?" she murmured softly, loud enough for everyone around her to hear. "For crying out loud, this is Lucille." I glanced down at my plain black gown. "I believe I look good, Sloane." "It's not a fashion show, it's Dad's birthday." Her face grew stern. "Each plate of this dinner costs hundreds of dollars. Are you even able to add to the gift that we all gave to Dad?" Beckett and I both contributed $5,000 toward the Scotland golf trip. Beckett arrived with a champagne flute before I could reply. "Is something wrong here? Dinner will soon begin." With a tone full of fake worry, Sloane remarked, "I'm just worried that Senna might not feel at ease in such a fancy place. Prices aren't even listed on the menu." Beckett's face assumed the patronizing look I was all too familiar with. "Oh, don't stress over that. If Tiny Steph doesn't have enough money for dinner, I can pay for it. What is the purpose of family?" He made sure everyone could hear his generosity as he laughed. Then, attracted by the wait, my mother came over. "What's happening?" "Everyone is waiting." I answered, "Nothing, Mom," attempting to ignore them. "Let's enter." In fact, my mother replied, her voice fading to a whisper, "Maybe you should wait in the bar until dinner is over. Your father has some very important clients here, and he should be the main focus, not." She gave my attire a hazy gesture. My cheeks began to crimson with humiliation and rage. "You're ashamed of my appearance, so you want me to skip Dad's birthday dinner." "Stop being dramatic," Sloane yelled. "We also have you on our mind. With all these successful individuals, you'll just feel uncomfortable." I attempted to utilize humor to diffuse the situation. "The last time I looked, eating cake didn't require a specific income level." Nobody chuckled. Rather, Sloane made a bodily move to block the private room's entrance. She scoffed, "We only want successful people here. You can't afford this restaurant." Beckett gave a nod. "Really, Steph, you'd feel better at ease somewhere that moves more quickly. Similar to an Applebee's." He laughed and Sloane laughed too. I realized quite well that we were making a scene. Even some of my father's business associates had noticed the altercation, and nearby diners were looking in our direction. Even my father, who was either unaware of what was going on or chose to ignore it, was standing there talking to some acquaintances. More embarrassing than whatever they had said was the public humiliation. I had the impression that I was getting smaller and less important by the moment. My chest constricted. I briefly worried that I would start crying, something I had vowed never to do in front of my family again. When a woman from her country club looked strangely at us, I saw my mother acting as though she didn't know me. With an embarrassed smile, I heard her whisper to the woman, "Just someone who got lost." It felt like a physical smack to be rejected. Some part of me had clung to the hope that my family still loved me for who I was, despite all the consumerism and status seeking. Now that hope seemed naive and silly. I was overcome by a wave of childhood recollections, each one serving as a prelude to this particular moment. Long after my siblings had been invited to join the adults for dinner, I found myself sitting at the children's table. While Sloane's and Beckett's academic accomplishments were lavishly lauded, mine were disregarded. Introducing myself as our other daughter to my parents' acquaintances without mentioning any of my achievements. I was so engrossed in these agonizing thoughts that I was hardly aware of the disturbance when a security guard came up. "Is something wrong here?" His tone was stern but professional as he requested. Sloane smiled polishedly as she turned to face him. "Absolutely no issue. My sister had just left." It was all in her smug face. As the last humiliation in her plan to keep me out of the family party, she anticipated that the guard would accompany me away. A chilly perspiration appeared on my forehead. I clutched my purse tighter to conceal it as my hand shook a little. Every second was an eternity of embarrassment as the moment dragged on. Beckett's contented grin, my mother's sidelong glance, and worst of all, my father's unwavering apathy while he talked to his friends, his back to the drama involving his youngest child, were all visible to me. The security officer gave me a closer look. Then his face changed from stern to one of astonished recognition. "Ms. Wilson." With a nod of respect, he said, "If you would like, your usual table is always available, Madam CEO." There was complete stillness after that. My family was processing what they had just heard, and I could just hear their minds churning. The restaurant manager hurried across the floor with a worried expression before anyone could react. "Miss Wilson," he began, speaking directly to me, "we were unaware that you would be spending tonight with your family. Is everything okay?" It was obvious from his tone that I was a valued visitor, someone whose happiness was a top concern. Sloane's jaw was hanging open. With utter bewilderment, she glanced between the manager and me. Beckett's eyes narrowed as he attempted to comprehend what was occurring, and his smirk had gone cold. When Lucien, the chief chef, came out of the kitchen wearing whites, the scene became much more heated. Grinning, he made his way directly to our group. "It's very good to see you tonight, Miss Wilson. That truffle risotto you liked last time has been the subject of my experiments. I would be privileged to make it just for you and your loved ones." In a matter of seconds, my mother's face was changing from one of humiliation to one of confusion to one of calculating. Seeing the disturbance, my father had finally stopped talking and was now looking on in real amazement. "I'm grateful, Lucien," I said coolly. "It would be beautiful." Lucille's owner, Cashin, decided to show up at that time, rounding up the staff procession that came to welcome me. He turned to my shocked family and said, "Senna, I would have set up the private balcony for you and your family if I had known you were coming. Last month, your daughter organized our most prosperous charity gala. Raised more than $2 million for educational initiatives in disadvantaged communities. These are actually my parents and siblings," I muttered. Cashin appeared perplexed. "However, I believed you had stated it was an investment when you bought the building last year. Not connected to family." The bombshell fell. In addition to being a successful CEO and frequent customer, the staff knew me as the owner of the building where Lucille was located, which was among the most costly pieces of real estate in the city. I saw a total change in the balance of power. Sloane's face had lost its hue. Beckett's attitude changed from disdain to recalculation as he straightened his posture. My father just stared at me as though he had not seen me in years, while my mother appeared as though she may pass out. The sensation that washed over me was complicated. Seeing their astonished expressions brought a certain sense of gratification. I'm not going to dispute that. The validation was briefly pleasant after years of contempt and disdain. However, there was also a great sense of sadness. For them to treat me with any kind of respect, I had to publicly disclose my riches and position. I had put them to the test in the hopes that they would appreciate me more for who I was than for what I had accomplished, and I had failed miserably. I answered with a steady tone. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. If I'm still welcome, I'd be delighted to attend my father's birthday celebration. Sloane, who always recovers quickly, changed strategies right away. You are, of course. All we were doing was making a dumb joke that went too far. You mean that, Beckett? Beckett gave a forceful nod. Yes, without a doubt. Sister humor. We tease, you know that. As though we had always been the closest of confidants, my mother had already put her arm around mine. You ought to have notified us about your business, darling. I whispered softly, removing my arm from hers. I know what you thought all this time. And that's precisely why I kept it from you. Sensing the tension, Cashin stepped in with ease. The private room for the Wilson party is prepared. Should I take you all along? I said yes, thank you. I made up my mind as we made our way to the dining room, myself now miraculously leading the procession instead of following. I could deal with this information with a sense of bitter victory, retaliating against them for their prior abuse. I could also choose the morally right path. I went with the latter for my own mental health and because I still had a deep affection for my family in spite of everything. With its expansive views of the city's skyline, the restaurant's nicest table was Senna's regular one, which the service moved us to. As they processed the profound change in their perception of their unsuccessful daughter and sister, my family followed in unusual silence, briefly putting an end to their usual competition for attention and status. I looked across the table at my father as we sat down. He was staring at me with real interest rather than distracted tolerance for the first time in years. As of yet, I wasn't certain if that was a sign of advancement or merely more conditional interest. However, it was a change at least. For a restaurant of its level, Lucille's private dining room was all you could want. The spotlessly arranged table was illuminated by soft light from crystal chandeliers. There was an amazing view of the city lights from the floor-to-ceiling windows. In the corner, a quartet of strings played softly. My father's business associates and my family took their seats, and I was seated conspicuously next to my father instead of at the far end, where I would have often been seated. With practiced grace, the restaurant staff rushed about us, extolling the evening's delicacies and offering menus encased in beautiful leather. Sloane was obviously attempting to network when I saw her standing next to one of my father's wealthiest clients. On the other side of the table, Beckett was doing the same thing. Old habits don't go away easily. Speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, Sloane remarked, "So, Senna, tell everyone about your company. I've always been really proud of my sister's accomplishments." I gave her a raised eyebrow. She had been physically preventing me from entering this exact room just an hour prior. "Yes, please tell us," Beckett added. "I've always known you were working on something noteworthy. That secrecy so enigmatic." He laughed artificially. My mother had already regaled the woman beside her with a completely made-up story about how she had always encouraged my spirit of entrepreneurship. She was adding, "You know, she gets it from me. I always pushed her to think creatively." The whole situation seemed unreal. Those who had previously been ashamed of me were now attempting to take pride in my seeming achievement. If the transformation hadn't been so painfully obvious, it would have been hilarious. I gave kind but succinct answers to questions regarding learning bridge throughout the appetizer course. It was founded by me 5 years prior, yes. Yes, it gave underfunded schools access to instructional software. No, I hadn't looked for attention for my part. I was greeted by a number of business associates from surrounding tables when the main dish was served. A significant investment in educational technology was one of them. Another was in charge of a foundation that had collaborated with Learning Bridge on a number of initiatives. My siblings were finally understanding how respected and connected I was in circles they had been attempting to enter for years, and every interaction appeared to hurt them physically. "What kept you from telling us?" At last, during a pause in the talk, my father inquired. For the first time that evening, he asked me a direct question. Everyone was suddenly interested in my response, and the table fell silent. I put down my fork and turned to face my family, who were all looking excited. The time has come for the confrontation. And even though I had previously been determined to be morally upright, I knew I had to be honest. I whispered, "I didn't tell you because it wouldn't have mattered. Not in the manner that family members ought to care for each other." "What are you saying?" With a genuine look of bewilderment, my mother inquired. "It would have mattered, of course. We would have been quite pleased." "That's precisely what I'm trying to say," I said. "Now that I'm successful by your standards, you're proud of me. But did you ever inquire about my happiness throughout the years when you believed I was merely running a bookstore? Have you ever expressed interest in my decisions or life?" Sloane shifted in her chair uneasily. "We had worries about you." We had higher expectations for you. No, I firmly answered. You desired for me to resemble you more. There is a distinction. I looked at my dad. Do you recall when I won the state writing contest at the age of 12, Dad? I couldn't wait to show you my tale when it appeared in a magazine, but Sloane's Harvard acceptance was announced on the same day. Nobody even thought to attend the awards ceremony. My father's face flashed with remorse as he glanced down at his plate. For example, Beckett was in medical school when I made the honor roll each semester of high school, but it was never acknowledged. That was a true accomplishment. We simply encouraged you to realize your full potential. My mother interrupted abruptly. No, I retorted. You were teaching me that a very particular type of success was necessary for me to be valuable. You all treated me as though I had failed when I left corporate America to pursue something I believed in. Something that would have an impact. Money and status were the only metrics that ever mattered to you. Sloane's expression grew stern. You deceived us for years then. You gave us the impression that you were having financial difficulties, while you were clandestinely establishing a tech empire. Why wouldn't that be manipulative? I said. I didn't lie. I simply didn't offer any information. Without the approval of wealth, I wanted to know if you could respect me and my decisions. I desired to be appreciated for who I am rather than for my accomplishments or possessions. That's unfair, Beckett contended. You made it possible for us to fail a test we were unaware we were taking. Perhaps, I admitted. But consider it. If I hadn't been identified by the security guy, would we still be speaking? Would I be seated at this table at all? If I didn't look successful enough, I wouldn't be invited to my own father's birthday, so I would be alone in the bar. The awkward silence that ensued was sufficient response. I glanced at my family members' features, observing their defensiveness, discomfort, and occasionally the first signs of sincere introspection. I said, I don't want an apology. Furthermore, I have no intention of spoiling Dad's birthday. I simply want everyone to realize that our family's relationship has been shattered for a very long time. It was simply impossible to ignore tonight. My dad cleared his throat. Would you mind spending a little time with me on the balcony, Senna? I believe we should have a private conversation. I saw the range of emotions on my siblings' faces as we got up to leave the table. Sloane was guarded, irate, and perplexed, as though her perspective had been called into question in a way that she was unable to ignore right away. At first glance, Beckett seemed cunning, but there was also a sense of sincere reflection that I hadn't seen in him in a long time. My mom just didn't look right. The entire evening's social script had been appended. She didn't have a prepared remark or a well-practiced smile to use for once. Uncertain of what would happen next, I accompanied my father to the private patio, feeling that we would finally have a genuine conversation for the first time in years. In contrast to the tense dining room we had left behind, the patio seemed serene. Below us, the city unfolded, a mosaic of lights against the night sky. I hadn't seen my father in years, but he appeared older and more frail as he stood at the railing. After a brief pause, he replied, I had a whole speech prepared for tonight. About my path to success from nothing. About hard work and legacy. He hesitated. It all seems so flimsy now. I gave him room and waited. Senna, when did we go wrong with you? His voice was thick with passion as he inquired. I stopped seeing you when. The inquiry went right to the core of the issue. Unexpectedly, tears welled up in my eyes. I answered, it was gradual. You used to teach me as a child that character was more important than money. I learned to appreciate honesty and sincerity from you. However, something happened as the firm expanded and we went into larger homes and more upscale districts. One thing began to define success: wealth and the prestige it brought. My dad gave a slow nod. I had nothing growing up. You are aware of that. We were unable to pay to heat the entire house during certain winters. Evenings when the only food served for supper was bread and whatever vegetables were on sale that week. He let out a long sigh. I made a self-promise that my kids would never experience such insecurity. Providing security evolved into chasing prestige at some point. I know what you mean, Dad. Yes, I do. However, you produced a new sort of insecurity by shielding us from material insecurity. One in which, unless we were succeeding in ways you valued, we never felt certain of your love. He looked directly at me. I apologize, Senna. Really. It's hardly an excuse, but I didn't witness it. I've been worried about and, to be honest, a little embarrassed by my youngest daughter. But now I learn that she's actually more successful than any of us. I gave a head shake. That still doesn't get the point. He scowled. How? I don't deserve your respect or attention because of the success of my company. He remained silent for a while. Then softer. I understand. Now I am aware of that. Or I'm starting to. Following a moment of hesitation, he said, Was that you? The experimental operation that wasn't covered by insurance, the medical treatment I received following my heart attack. I gave a nod. When I found out that my father's insurance had rejected the surgery, I paid for it secretly. The treatment had cost about $500,000. What kept you from telling me? He inquired. If you had known it was from me, would you have accepted it? From the daughter you believed was working at a bookshop and just scraping by. That was plenty of an explanation, but he had none. After a moment he said, Senna, I'd like to get to know you again. The true you. As my daughter, not as a successful CEO or any other title you may have acquired. If you will allow me that opportunity. I was impressed by the sincerity in his speech. Dad, I'd like that too. The mood had changed by the time we were back at the table. With everyone, but especially with me, my father appeared more involved and present. He asked me questions about my life, my company, and my passions for the rest of the evening, listening with real attention instead of the preoccupied civility I had been used to. My mother invited me to go with her to the ladies' room after dessert was served, which was a clear ruse for a private discussion. She turned to me with tears in her eyes after we were alone. I'm at a loss for words, Senna. I don't feel like I know you at all. That's because you never tried to, I said, not in an impolite manner. You were too preoccupied with trying to change who I am. She wiped away her eyes with a tissue and continued. I just wanted you to have everything I didn't. You have no idea what my childhood was like. The embarrassment of living in the wrong neighborhood and wearing used clothing. I vowed to give my kids every advantage when I first met your father and we began to prosper. I saw my mother clearly for the first time. Not as the polished social climber she had grown into, but as the insecure young woman who still made her own decisions decades later. Mom, I know you wish to shield us from the things that have wounded you. However, you must realize that you were forcing your anxieties and insecurities on us, particularly on me, since I didn't fit your definition of success. Slowly she nodded. Your brother and sister were simpler. They desired what I believed they ought to desire. You were always asking questions that I didn't know the answers to. She gave me a fresh appearance. Senna, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I simply wish I had a better understanding of it. That's the problem, Mom. You didn't inquire. However, there is still time to begin. Our discussion was a start, but it wasn't a panacea for years of miscommunication. I made it clear what I would and would not tolerate in the future. And my mom actually listened, maybe for the first time. Sloane cornered me by the dessert table when we got back to the party. As defensive as ever, she started. So you've been secretly judging us all this time, I answered. No more than you've been publicly criticizing me. That made her wince. I've succeeded by any measure. I put a lot of effort into getting here. Sloane, I've never doubted your work ethic. I've questioned how you and I have determined our value based only on outward indicators of achievement. Says the secret millionaire, she sneered, although her tone lacked conviction. I clarified. It doesn't matter how much money I have or don't have. It's that you could have shown me interest and respect even when you believed I had very little. You may have appreciated my contentment in a job I ostensibly enjoyed. Rather, you considered me an embarrassment that needed to be controlled. Sloane paused to think about what I had said. She finally confessed, I've been jealous of you. But it was obviously a painful confession for her. Even when I assumed you were merely employed at that bookshop. What is the object of jealousy? You appear happy. I never felt free like that. Do you understand what it's like to put in 80-hour work weeks at a job you detest out of fear that everyone would be disappointed if you acknowledge your mistakes? It was a rare instance of my sister, who is usually calm, showing weakness. So why do you stay? I inquired. How else could I proceed? I have shaped myself into this person. Sloane, it's never too late to make a change. Promise you that. Although our talk wasn't a total reconciliation, It was the first time we had spoken honestly in a long time. Although Sloane was extremely protective, I could see glimpses of the sister I knew from our early years, before achievement and position had taken over her entire identity. As the evening was coming to an end, Beckett came over to me. With unusual self-awareness, he remarked, "So all this time while I've been showing off my cars and my celebrity clients, you've been building something that actually matters. Beckett, your work is important too. It's not insignificant to assist folks in feeling good about their appearance." He gave a shrug. "A portion of it is significant. I am aware that a large portion of it is merely vanity. It has been years since I performed surgery for a legitimate medical necessity." He gave me an inquisitive look. "Steph, are you content? With your life, your business, everything?" I was taken aback by the question, especially because Beckett asked it. "Yes, most days. I have faith in my work. Although it's not always simple, it feels purposeful." He gave a contemplative nod. "I'm not sure if I can say the same thing. I've spent so much time pursuing the next accomplishment and status symbol that I've lost sight of what I truly desire." He smiled ruefully. "Isn't that pitiful?" "Not pitiful," I replied. "People. Everybody occasionally gets sucked into the pursuit of outside approval. A few more than others," he said. I had a fresh perspective on my family as the birthday cake was presented and we all sang to my father. They still had the flaws and the status anxieties and fears that had characterized our relationships for years. However, something genuine had been broken open tonight, making room for further genuine connections, if we had the courage to foster them. I extended an invitation to all of them to come to Learning Bridge the next week before the evening concluded. They accepted, which surprised me. They found the company visit to be enlightening. They saw me in my element, leading a group of committed professionals who obviously admired me for my leadership style rather than my title. They took a tour of our development floor, where educators and technologists collaborated to design software that catered to various learning requirements and styles. They listened to testimonies from schools in underprivileged areas where our initiatives have improved math and reading rates. Most significantly, they discovered the humanitarian endeavors carried out by the company's foundation, including the schools we had assisted in constructing in developing nations, the scholarship programs for bright students from underprivileged families, and the teacher training programs in areas that had trouble keeping skilled teachers. I didn't show them these items to brag, but rather to let them know what was truly important to me, what success seemed like to me instead of to them. And gradually, I noticed indications that they were at least making an effort to comprehend. My family had undergone a significant transformation 6 months after that momentous birthday supper. The change was genuine and continuous, but it wasn't sudden or miraculous. The biggest surprise to me was my father. He launched a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds within weeks of learning about Learning Bridge, using his connections and business experience to guide them through obstacles he was all too familiar with from his own experience. He contacted me frequently, sometimes to check in and have the kinds of talks we had missed for so long, and other times to ask for guidance regarding the program. At one of our lunch meetings, he informed me, "I was defining success too narrowly. Seeing the impact of your work and watching you with your team has caused me to reevaluate a lot of things." My mother changed more slowly and reluctantly. Social positioning and status seeking were firmly embedded habits. However, even she began to alter. She started doing weekly volunteer work at a community center in an area she would have otherwise completely shunned. She did it reluctantly at first, giving in to the new dynamic of the family. But with time, I saw that she was talking about the people she had met there with respect and true interest. Ever the pragmatic, Sloane managed to balance her profession with more fulfilling jobs without giving up her well-earned job. She began taking on pro bono cases for educational justice and access, use her legal knowledge to defend students from underrepresented groups. It fit her competitive personality and directed it toward a goal other than self-improvement. At one of our recently established sister dinners, she confessed, "I'm still working crazy hours, but I don't mind for the first time in a long time." A few of these situations are very significant. Beckett was arguably the most drastically altered. He changed his practice to include a large amount of reconstructive surgery for accident victims and assault survivors after much introspection, especially for individuals who couldn't afford such surgeries. The balance had changed significantly. Yet he continued to run his profitable cosmetic clinic. He told me, "I'd forgotten why I went into medicine in the first place. It wasn't for the money or the status, at least not initially. I did it because I wanted to assist others in regaining their sense of wholeness." For my part, I kept on with my own recovery process. I couldn't deny that I was scarred by the initial pain of being rejected at the restaurant. There were still times when I questioned whether my family's renewed interest and respect for me was genuinely a reflection of who I am as a person, or if it was only a way for them to acknowledge my status. Family ties take time to change and are intricate, with layers of expectation and history. However, I was discovering inner tranquility to justify my own decisions without requiring their consent. In actuality, I hadn't been entirely truthful with myself about why I had kept my accomplishment a secret for so long. Indeed, I desired to be adored for who I was, not for my accomplishments. I had been shielding myself from vulnerability, however, by employing concealment as a defense against possible rejection. I was now learning how to interact with them more authentically, to discuss my challenges as well as my accomplishments, to let them see me in all my complexity, the true me. At times, they handled the situation admirably. They occasionally resorted to old habits. Each of us was a work in progress. Over time, our family dinners, once displays of accomplishment and prestige, became increasingly sincere. Even while there were still tense and misunderstood moments, there was also vulnerability, laughter, and a developing capacity to recognize and embrace one another for who we really were. Learning Bridge kept growing and prospering. We started new projects aimed at creating resources for students with learning disabilities and supplying educational technologies to refugee groups. I became more and more committed to giving young people, regardless of their circumstances or background, access to opportunities. I even started collaborating with my father on an educational foundation that integrated my technology innovation with his business skills. Using the best of both of our strengths, it was a partnership that neither of us could have envisioned a year ago. The most important lesson I learned from this whole event was that material possessions, accomplishments, or social standing don't truly define one's value. Integrity is the source of it. In leading a life consistent with your principles, in making a difference in whichever field you work in, achieving success at the expense of a genuine relationship is not success at all. I also discovered that, despite decades of ingrained habits, people are capable of changing. Our new relationships needed ongoing care and the occasional reorientation because my family was far from ideal. However, our development demonstrated that there is always time to create something more authentic, fulfilling, and in line with our core beliefs. My family's attempt to exclude me that night at Lucille because I didn't live up to their expectations of success turned out to be a turning point rather than the end. Even while it was terrible, it required a reckoning that made room for development and rejuvenation. Sometimes creating something greater requires a moment of total breakdown. Authenticity finally shows who actually belongs in our lives and the circumstances under which they belong as I reflect on that night and everything that transpired. When confronted with reality, some relationships grow stronger. Others disintegrate. And it should be that way. The relationships that endure, those based on respect for one another and tested by honesty, are the ones that are worthwhile fostering. Have you ever been evaluated by your family using flimsy standards of success? Have you ever had to defend your personal beliefs about what is important in life? And that's the thing about revenge, not all of it needs to be loud. Sometimes the most powerful response is rising quietly, living fully, and healing deeply. I didn't have to prove anything, I just had to keep growing. If you've ever been betrayed or underestimated, remember, your peace, your growth, your boundaries, that's your power. Let go, not to forget, but to free yourself. If this story hit home, share your own journey in the comments. How did you turn pain into purpose? Let's talk, listen, and heal together. What does your version of rising above look like?